And Stephen K. Peeples here. We're talking again with Martin Melucci and Chuck Granata, and we're talking about the A Voice on Air box set of Frank Sinatra material from various radio performances from the mid-30s to the mid-50s. And you know, I wanted to just kind of put Sinatra in context with the great 20th century vocalists, right? Kind of immediately preceding him on the fan base was Bing Crosby, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so who was before Bing? Who would Bing's, you know?
Before Bing, you had
Al Jolson.
Yeah, the very early crooners: Al Jolson, Russ Colombo, Eddie Cantor. You know, and before them, it really wasn't pop oriented. It was
operatic.
And also, you know, singers like Morton Downey, who sang Irish songs, and you know, you had almost like this ethnic kind of singer that popped up in between Caruso and Cantor and Jolson and so forth. In the middle of that, you had like the Morton Downeys, and there's another, I forget the other great, his name escapes me right now. There was another great singer that recorded on those old single and double-sided Victor Red Seals, you know, sang Irish songs. The Irish tenor, I guess, was right in between Caruso and the early crooners.
And it probably even had an influence that was popular with all the...
Yeah, I think so.
Depending on the part of the country, at least, all the different Irish immigrants and so on that was building in the country.
Yeah, for sure. It was the popular music of that moment.
And it translated to a lot of people.
But, you know, it's interesting that the singer picture in terms of recording in the mid to late 20s. And then, of course, when they were singing on stage, I don't think that they had developed sound reinforcement at that point. You know, they didn't have a modern PA system yet, even though the electric microphone had been developed. So they would sing with megaphones.
They had a belt.
You know, they didn't know from Ethel Merman. You know,
Bessie Smith.
Or Bessie Smith. That's you're absolutely right. So, you know, it's interesting because Sinatra has often cited Bing Crosby as his primary influence, which makes a lot of sense because, you know, Bing really started out in the early 30s when the electric microphone now had become the standard in the recording studio. And Bing started making early films, you know, as a singer. And he kind of set the stage for someone like Sinatra. Now, Bing, unfortunately, didn't have, and I think part of this was just the moment that Sinatra arrived, Bing didn't have that huge outpouring of adoration from these teenage girls that Frank did 10 years later. And, you know, Frank basically took what Bing Crosby had started and really ramped it up to an unprecedented level. And I like to say that Sinatra was really the first true multimedia superstar because he was a star and dominated film, records, radio, and television, and the concert and performing stage in the 40s, you know. And Bing, I think, really started that. Frank just was able to really riff on it and bring it to a whole different level.
He was able to use his own persona, as you've mentioned, and he, to me, reached a lot deeper into the songs for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, there is a big...
Bing sings a little bit more on the surface. His voice may be a little bit prettier sometimes, but Frank sings the song and gets the emotion across.
Yeah, it's a different...
And it hit those girls when they were screaming.
Yeah.
It was beyond looking at them and being attracted physically, which they were.
Right.
It was just, it pulled at their heartstrings and made them shriek. And I don't blame them. I mean, it still touches us now.
I mean, there's that long, you know, debate over the differences between Crosby and Sinatra vocally. You know, I don't think Bing had as strong a voice as Sinatra had. I also think he didn't have the range that Sinatra had. But there were qualities that you can hear Frank picked up from Bing. You know,
Bing was the first one to really be popular at singing in the modern style.
And also Bing started to really bend the notes and have that nice fluid sound, which Sinatra borrowed from and then, you know, kind of improved on and took the phrasing from Billie Holiday, added a little bit of the tone of Bing Crosby, the edge of a Louis Armstrong, the diction of Mabel Mercer, and became Sinatra. It's a whole different thing than Bing was doing.
I kind of see Bing. I kind of see Bing as somewhat. You mentioned it. You touched on it, but he had a sense for jazz also.
Absolutely,
he was a big jazz fan,
he started as a jazz singer,
and so he was a white guy. Let's face it. It was race music, and there was white guy music, and
right.
he was able to imbue his singing style and his instrumentation a little bit with a little bit more jazzy stuff than
sure.
and that, I think that helped to introduce the genre to a larger beyond the black original black audience, and I think that was important, but also the phrasing that you mentioned, bringing the phrasing of jazz instruments and playing of jazz instruments into the vocal
right.
Arena is something that Bing kind of created the blueprint for, and as you said, Frank really built the building on top of that.
Right, absolutely. Well, Bing is the other hugely prolific radio artist of that era. I mean, not only was Bing on the radio, Bing was technically ahead of his time, and he introduced tape recording specifically to preserve his radio shows and pre-record them. So
he could go golfing.
Yeah, there's a whole different aspect to the Bing part of this whole story. But essentially, when Bing was on the radio in the 40s and early 50s, he hosted all of the jazz greats. I mean, those shows that he did where he features Louis Armstrong.
Well, they were friends too.
Well, yeah, they were friends, but he had them on the show and sang with them, and Louis played and sang, and of course, you have to credit Louis Armstrong is the foundation for American jazz. I mean, that's it. Even all vocal phrasing, I think, stems from Louis.
Absolutely.
From his trumpet.
Yep.
He then started to sing, but it was really his phrasing on trumpet that sparked
lyrical.
The whole idea of the jazz-inflected lyrics. So they kind of go hand in hand.
Speaking of hand in hand, that's a nice segue. Over the years, Frank and Bing had this quote unquote rivalry, and one of some of the greatest moments that I've ever seen on television are the ones where Bing and Frank are riffing off of each other on stage, and the Christmas show that they did, for instance, was priceless.
Amazing.
And it's just all. I mean, of course they have a basic script, but it's also extemporaneous, and you really feel like it's live, and it's happening right in your living room.
You knew that maybe one was going to make fun of one being skinny, or the other one's going to be bald, and then they just built on that.
Yeah, it was a great repartee and a great relationship, but also I think built on a lot of mutual respect.
That's it. You really hit it, Stephen. It's all respect. You could tell when you're watching Frank sing with Bing, he's an admirer. He's in awe. That was his idol growing up. Pretty amazing that he got. How many people in the world get to sing and act and dance?
His audience matured with him,
of course,
and those screaming girls weren't going to. The new screaming girls weren't going to scream for him anymore. They were going to scream for Elvis, and they were going to scream for Paul McCartney, and whatever else followed.
For sure. And the other thing is that by the time Frank was becoming that teen sensation, Bing was already establishing himself as an actor.
Yeah.
You know, and he had venues and Birkin venues and writing songs for him at Paramount. So, you know, he was always a little bit ahead of Sinatra in terms of what he was doing. That was Bing's next logical progression, and Sinatra followed suit. Sinatra went into film and then television. So it was like he was always trailing Bing.
But he started earlier too, so.
Yeah, well, Bing started in, you know, much earlier.
Well, you know, the other way to look at it is that Bing kind of carved the path through the jungle, and again, you know, to mix metaphors, created the blueprint.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
And we're back with Chuck Granata and Martin Melucci. We're talking about A Voice on Air, the Frank Sinatra collection of radio performances from the 30s to the 50s. And, you know, I listened to the early takes on the set. And, you know, there's a certain confidence that Frank has. But as the set progresses, as you listen to it, as the years go by, he kind of evolves from a kind of a nervous kid to a really self-confident, wise guy, you know. And the other thing is, he's like a real Jersey guy. You know, he's got the accent, he's got the tood, he's got the attitude. You know, guys like that. You know, he's kind of a little tough guy, and the girls just, oh my God. And then, you know, and then he goes from that. As soon as he opens his mouth, these mellifluous tones come out, and just the. I'll keep it clean, but things happen and just people get out of control. So I think this set really shows the arc of how he developed this sense of self-confidence and stage presence, and how to work an audience, and how to get that kind of frenzy.
It's the missing piece as far as what was documented on releases. There was nothing that really, except for Drips and Trabs, thankfully with his bonus tracks on previous CDs that he's produced, that you could hear bits and pieces, or on box sets, another set that documented that era that included radio material, but nothing that really showed an overview of that entire period like this does. There was nothing before this.
Yeah, that was my concept, to basically showcase a time and place in both American history, the history of American media, and Frank Sinatra's first 20 years.
I mean, there weren't even live albums that become so popular over time, but there were no live 78s of this stuff back then where he would do shows and whatnot. So we didn't even have, and there isn't much as far as actual concerts that exist that was recorded of him, but this also documents him as a live performer.
In the 1940s, yeah.
In that way, yes, obviously the scope of the set and that it covers, that wasn't documented.
Yeah, so this was important. It was really the missing link, and it really gives anyone listening to it, whether they're a Sinatra fan or not, whether they understand the value of radio in mid-century America or not, I think it gives them a real snapshot of what this was like. And that's why I included things like the commercials and little interview segments and things that would kind of enhance the listening experience, the program openings and closings, and the little bridges.
Just enough for flavor to make it feel like you're listening to the radio.
Yeah, I wanted
the music first, and then just enough of that to give it atmosphere.
I wanted people to feel like they
documented.
They could come home and
turn the knob and
turn on their CD player. If you load these 4 discs in, and it would be like tuning into the radio in 1935.
Tuning into the old Philco.
The Philco, right? That, you know, and just listening for 5 hours and saying, "Wow, I just took this travel in a time capsule, man." And I think these things at the time were considered evanescent. They just disappeared after they were broadcast, but that's not true. We have these transcriptions, which, you know, in and of itself,
it's a miracle.
It's a miracle that we have them.
Well, we're gonna talk about that in just a moment. We'll be right back.